I think Riot has been very unclear on the criteria of how they decide MVP of the split, and exactly what opinions or what stats are used in order to determine this award. And I feel it's very unclear. So let's first get into some of the statistics from potential MVP award prospects. So let's start with Impact. Impact, he has the second highest MVP votes, and he's been phenomenal at the beginning of the split. And people would say that there is a slight smudge on his resume because he was subbed out for Ray during a couple games, but I think that's more so to give Ray on-stage experience and a chance to prove what he's worth. But it is true that Impact did slump a little bit. So then there's Arrow. He has the highest kill participation on my list at 70.7%, and he has the greatest DPM on this list with 589. And this might be attributed to the meta in the beginning with Varus being a poke champion and how he's able to get DPM out a lot, and the kill participation with utility ADCs in the beginning in setting up plays like that. So now we have something high controversy, which is Lyra, and if Lyra should even be considered because he's on a losing team, a team that just recently went through relegations. And by the way, when talking about Lyra, you can't talk about the games where he was in relegations and how like he was carrying his team through a lot of those games, because if you talk about his relegation games, then you have to talk about playoff games for all these other players. So relegations is definitely out of consideration when talking about Lyra. But and this is the point that I'll more delve into later on in this video about how a loser, if they should be allowed to be considered for MVP or not, in terms of being someone who's great on a team but on a losing team. So we'll talk about that later. Let's go to Dardoch, who has the highest MVP votes out of anyone at 12. And basically, Immortals live and died by this guy. If Dardoch wasn't carrying, then basically the team was going to lose. And that was the only person that was able to do that with on Immortals. You have Pobelter, who's just an average or below average mid laner. You have Cody Sun, who's a rookie. And then Flame, which a big part of the meta during this season was tanks. So if he was on a carry, yeah, there was potential for him to carry Immortals to a victory. But for generally the most part, he wasn't. So you have Dardoch, who has to kind of snowball the team and get a early lead in order for them to win. And as a side note, I want to talk about clutch players. I don't hear that term a lot in League of Legends, and I think it's a great term. It's used in CSGO a lot, and how a person can be clutch, which is they are very great in high pressure situations, and where situations the odds are against them. You know, say it's a 1v2, normally you shouldn't win those, or a 1v3, but for some reason this guy is able to pull it out, even if everything is against them. His nerves just do not break. For instance, there are players like Spawn from Counter-Strike 1.6, kind of old school Counter-Strike player, so bear with me. But he could be someone that you consider clutch. So I just think that term isn't really used a lot. I hear like popping off or whatever, which means that they're doing very well. But I don't think that can be said the same as clutch. I think those are a little bit too different. So just saying, my vote for using the term clutch. But now let's get back to Jensen. Jensen, he's fourth highest MVP vote with 10 votes. and he's not tied with anyone else because Impact and Haunter are tied second place with 11 votes. And then you have second highest DPM at 588, highest gold per minute at 400, and highest CS per minute at 9.7, with also bonus stat, second highest KDA at 5.4. So this guy he's doing really well. He's doing a lot for Cloud9, and he's doing a lot in terms of his gold per minute is being used effectively. So Jensen, if someone were to vote for him for MVP, really the statistics are in his favor. So I wouldn't be mad if he got MVP at all. And now you have Haunter, who has second highest MVP votes, and he's tied with Impact. But he isn't on any of the charts. He isn't up there for kill participation. He isn't up there for DPM. He isn't up there for CS per minute or things like that. And that might be attributed to top laners playing tanks a lot. And as I said before, with Arrow, the meta can largely distort these statistics. So sometimes just pure statistics aren't the way to go when deciding a thing like MVP of the split. And so I know everyone's going to talk about this and why I don't have him on here, but Bjergsen, I don't think he's really in contention for MVP, just because he didn't get a lot of MVP votes. He's not top 5 DPM. He's not top 5 kill participation. Yet he has some of the highest gold per minute, so it just looks like he's not doing a whole lot with his gold for his team. So I'm just not really going to talk about him. But I want to get to loser MVP for like finals. So in other sports, let's go, for instance, the NFL. Chuck Howley, he was on the Cowboys, played in the Super Bowl back in like the 60s. I forget what year specifically. I think it was like Super Bowl 5. And he got MVP for the Super Bowl game. Then you have Jerry West. He got MVP on the Lakers for the NBA Finals, which I believe go through 7 games. And then you have 5 players in the NHL, which is the hockey league in America. You have 5 players that have gotten MVP, yet we're on the losing team. But league, I just want to clarify, differs because it's through the entire season versus these other sports that I just mentioned are specifically in the finals. So those are like the 2 best teams out of the whole league, versus League of Legends, they do every single player within that region is able to be voted upon for MVP. So and I also want to talk about if there's like an argument of, well, if he didn't win the game, then he shouldn't get player of the game or MVP of the game. We're not talking about the split right now, but of the game. And that argument, I don't think it really encompasses all the facts or ideas of what should be considered for MVP, because you have someone like Froggen, for instance, who is a clear carry on his team, and he has great damage per minute. I believe, let me check this really quick. Yeah, he has the highest DPM out of anyone in the whole entire league, and he has some of the highest kill participation out of the whole entire league at 72.5%. So this guy he's no slouch in terms of the entire league, and even what was it in Summer Split, his team was terrible, and they would usually find victories just because Froggen was popping off, or I'm going to use clutch in this instance. Froggen was super clutch, and I think Froggen is a clutch player, by the way. So that's the big difference that I think Riot needs to talk about is what are you? Are you MVP to the team, or are you MVP encompassing the entire league? And that's a very important distinction, because someone like Lira, he's in contention for MVP because he's very important to his team. He makes his team win games. They live and die by this guy. But he isn't on top of the statistics when it comes to kill participation, DPM, anything like that. So Riot really needs to explain exactly what criteria is required for MVP. And a player on a losing team having great numbers can't win MVP. I think it's kind of weird, because if they can't win MVP for the game, yet they can win MVP for the split, it's two different things. You know, you're allowing it to happen in one instance, but not another. You're allowing a team that hasn't even made playoffs, a player win MVP of the split, but they don't win a whole lot of games, versus player of the game. Only a winning team can get player of the game. So I think there's a big difference, and they need to clarify exactly how they're doing this process a little bit. And I know even still MVP is extremely biased and extremely opinionated, but it needs to have a little bit more clarity. And next, I want to talk about improved player. So, improved player, I don't think should be a consideration when talking about MVP. So we have Rookie of the Split, which largely is given to someone who shows really good improvement, and he stacks up to the rest of the league in terms of being a rookie. He's done really well for himself. I'm looking at you, Cody-san. But improved player, I don't think should be a criteria for MVP, because it's kind of like standing up to the competition, I guess, too. So let's talk about the biggest outlier for that, which is Hanser. Everyone's talking about how he should get MVP because he's facing against all these Korean top laners. You know, you have a legendary top laner like Looper, Flame, Someday. Like, these guys, they're insane top laners, yeah, no doubt. But should you give MVP to a person just because they're stacking up to harder competition? Should that be a criteria to consider someone for MVP? Like, should you give kudos to that person? Because in the same sense, why not give kudos to a person on the losing team for standing up against harder competition? Lira, for instance, standing up to harder competition because he's in a last place team, holding his own against a higher place team. For Froggen, because he's not on a super great team, yet he does a ton of work, and he uses his gold effectively. He shot calls well. So standing up to the competition, I don't think that should be a factor in determining MVP. But that needs to be clarified if Riot is using that or not. And that's up to their decision. I can see a reason as to why to use that, but it's more so they need to decide exactly how they're making MVP of the split. And it's not that any of these systems are more inherently wrong or more inherently right, but they need to explain themselves and their thought process. Which, by the way, I will be explaining who I believe is MVP of the spring split for 2017 of North America specifically in my next video. And also give me a little follow on Twitter too, at Izento. I guess subscribe to the YouTube video or whatever. And yeah, I'll see you guys next video.